Well, hello, everybody. This is Tim Green with Rattle Magazine. Welcome to Rattlecast number 180. So glad you could join me. Today's guest is Michael Dylan Welch. So if you need to know anything about haiku, is a great episode for you. We're going to learn all about haiku and related forms and all the things that Michael does, which are very fascinating. We also have a Poets Respond guest coming up in the first couple minutes, too. Before we begin, though, I should say that Rattle is a publication of the Rattle Foundation, a 501c3 nonprofit working to promote the practice of poetry. We've been continuous publication since 1995 and are unaffiliated with any other organization. We just do this because we love poetry, and I know you do too, so please do click the like button and share, and make sure you're subscribed. Ring the bell for notifications. Leave reviews on iTunes or Spotify or anywhere else you're listening to this right now. That helps a lot spread poetry around the internet, and that's what we want to do. That's the only reason we do this, is to share poetry, because we think poetry is valuable, and I know you do too. So, like I said, our first guest is Alejandro Aguirre with Samba do Sua Terra, the Sunday poem. And here he is. Let's say hi to Alejandro.
Hey everybody, hey Tim, how's it going?
Good. How you doing, Alejandro? It's great to see you.
Yeah, nice seeing you too.
So do you want to explain about what this poem was about that we featured on Sunday? It's a really interesting news story. I always love the sort of, off the grid kind of news stories that you don't get a whole lot of attention. They're fun, especially when there's like a little bit of a science theme or a biology theme. And this was one of those. So tell us what the story was about.
Yeah, of course. I wasn't that big of a science buff, but the story attracted me too. It was in the Times. There's a new study supposedly that the dolphins that help fishermen in Laguna, Brazil, to catch mullet fish live longer than other dolphins in the area. Mainly because, I mean, it's a mutually beneficial relationship. They get some of the fish from the catch, and also they stay inside the cove, which puts them away from some of the natural predators that other dolphins would face. And that somewhat reminded me of an experience I had recently. I went to a wedding, one of those big weddings that you see a lot of family members from around the country that you haven't seen in a long time. And I had a chance to meet my cousin's wife, who is also from Brazil. And it turns out I'm no good at dancing samba, even though she tried to teach me.
Yeah, well, it's a really interesting story. It reminded me of there's another story, the law of the tongue. Have you heard that? There's in Australia, there is this history where, for I think like 100 years, there was this whole pod of orca. They would hunt baleen whales and help the fishermen hunt. And so they would like trap a baleen whale in the little inlet, and then they'd come and like bang their tail on the water to let the fishermen know that it was there. And then the fishermen go out and harpoon it, and then for the whale oil, and then the orcas would get the tongue as a payment. And so they got sort of a cheap tongue, like an easy to catch tongue. They didn't have to like chew
Yeah,
up the. Apparently, orcas die by when their teeth run out. So if they get to have somebody cut up the dolphin or the whale a little bit, they live a lot longer. And so they got sort of an easy meal, their favorite gourmet dish, at the same time as the fishermen got an easy whale trapped in the bay. And so it worked out for like 100 years apparently. And a very fascinating thing too, where the dolphins here, bottlenose dolphins, I think they were helping fishermen pull in the what kind of fish was it? Whatever
it's
fish
mainly
it
mullet
was.
fish.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, very
yeah,
fascinating
it's great.
story. Yeah, and then you took it in a really interesting place. There's such a musicality to this poem too. How did you know that you wanted to go in that direction? Like, how did the poem come to be? The form that we see it here.
Um, well, that I don't know exactly. And sometimes these things are a mystery to me. But I would say I think from the beginning, well, I've been toying around with a lot of ocean imagery, oceanic metaphors. Um, and I think it really came together somewhere towards the middle where I connected a sailing mast and the sail itself to a piece of clothing.
Hmm.
And that's when I really started getting direction into the poem.
Yeah, a very cool one. Thanks for sharing it. Do you want to go ahead and read it now for everybody?
I'd love to. Samba de Soterra. Light as swash, her soles left no trace in the sand. Sandals pelagic like caravels. She had tossed hers to the sea as if they had always belonged there, sailing on their cloth straps. And she here, barefoot, teaching samba. She spread her sarong from left to leech and, laying it by my feet, said that I was not dancing if it puckered at my heels. I wasn't dancing. We tuned the radio to a Portuguese station, the host speaking too quickly for me. Listening, my instructor confessed that she missed being a fisherman's daughter and how wrong she was to dream of what lay beyond Laguna. Saudade, like dolphin clicks, felt against the shin with no net to cast.
Yeah, beautiful poem. Thanks so much for sharing that. Once again, that was a Samba do Sua Terra, probably butchering that pronunciation. But Alejandro Aguirre, thanks so much for being a guest. Really, a beautiful
Yes,
poem.
thank you.
It was one of those poems where I was deciding between a few, and that was the one that just reading out loud felt the best reading out loud. I loved all the sounds of it. It's a great poem. Thanks so much for sharing it and joining us today.
Thank you. Very honored.
Yep, take care. Yeah, that was Alejandro Aguirre with Sunday's poem. And now we're going to take a quick break and go to tonight's main guest, Michael Dylan Welch. So sit tight, and I will be right back in just a moment. And we're back. Thanks so much for your patience. Like I mentioned, today's guest is Michael Dylan Welch. Michael's written haiku since 1976. He's the past or current officer, director, or board member of the Haiku Society of America, Haiku Poets of Northern California, Haiku Northwest, Haiku North America, the Haiku Archives, the Tonka Society of America. I mean, you can just get the idea of what we're doing right now. Michael's the proprietor of the National Haiku Writing Month and runs an extensive personal website devoted to mostly haiku, graceguts.com, which you can find a whole lot of stuff that Michael does. He's also the editor-publisher of Press Here Haiku and Tonka Books since 1989. His books are all over the place. There's a whole bunch of books as well, anthologized everywhere. Let's see. He has a poem in which was published in the back of 150 million U.S. postage stamps in 2012. He lives with his family in Shamamish, Washington. And here is Michael Dylan Welch. Hey, Michael, how you doing?
Hello, thanks for having me, Tim.
Yeah, it's such a pleasure to have you. It's I'm a fan of yours, and I've probably sent people to your website more often than any other poet, and we'll talk about why later. But before we talk about that and all the great stuff you publish, there's just so much content there at graceguts.com and so much that you do and have been doing for decades. But let's start out with a poem. What do you want to read first?
Well, I know you had Campbell McGrath on your Rattlecast recently, a few weeks ago, was it? I'm not quite sure.
It was actually a good, last summer. Yeah.
Okay. Sometime recently, anyway. And Campbell McGrath was sort of a pandemic discovery for me, so I've been enjoying getting into his poems. And I created an erasure from one of his poems, and I'd like to start by reading that. And this is using a page from a poem called Homage to Syntax. And you can see the poem on the screen. I won't read it. I'll just skip to the erasure of it. This is what I came up with.
I think we should read it just so people can, because a lot of people are just listening. And it's not too long. Do you want to just read it?
Okay. All right. I'll read the original poem. This is the second page of 2 pages of the poem. Here, a new usuality, a new haze, new phobia, plea for erasure and ethics of stimulus. Glyph, logos, the hyena, rebirth, salvific. Here, a new catastrophe, a new poetics of disaster, a newly authenticated community of ruins. Glyph, deaf mute, sign and countersign. Glyph, our eternal union, emblem of paradise. Here, nothing. Here, gates of the city. Glyph, scent of cloves, something forced on immortality. Here, new triumphalism carved in sandstone. Name of a bird or tree or flower. Here, name of a bird. Here, tree, flower, tree. That might make more sense if you read the first page too. But the homage to syntax, that idea, is sort of what he's getting at. And it's the word erasure in this poem that just, I couldn't resist trying an erasure of this poem. So this is what I came up with. Erasure, a new poetics of disaster. Deaf mute, nothing here, carved in sand. Which sort of, I don't know, negative, downer. I don't know, something. It's not happy. So I extended it, made it just erasure.
Yeah, very interesting.
And I went further.
Yeah.
Erased the whole thing. Then I came to my senses and came up with this variation. A plea for erasure, stimulus, rebirth, a new poetics, authentic community, eternal paradise, something immortal, a new name. So there's my playing around with Camo McGrath's homage to syntax, and it's not haiku, obviously. I do a lot of longer poetry in addition to haiku.
Yeah, and
so I framed this all up and actually had this in a gallery last year.
Yeah, that's very cool. So for people who couldn't see and are only listening, that's each 5 items that transference between the first original page and then the 4 alternate versions as that evolves and changes. How often do you do erasures? Is that something that you've done frequently, Michael, or is that just you experimenting that one time and it's like a one-off project?
I would say I've done maybe 10 of them, so not very often.
Mm-hmm.
Either with completely unpoetic texts, like children's illustrations that have text on them, where I try to take advantage of the illustration on the page to draw out some fresh meaning. But it's fun. There's some people who are really skilled at it. Just do incredible stuff. Mary Ruefle comes to mind. But yeah, it's not something I do a whole lot, but it's fun to try now.
Mm-hmm. And so you're most known for haiku, and I've always been curious because I don't know the answer. Like, how did you end up getting into haiku? It mentions you've been writing haiku since 1976 in your bio there. What was it that drew you to haiku originally, and why that versus other forms? What made that stand out as something that you were drawn to?
Bit of a mystery. My middle name really is Dylan. I was named after Dylan Thomas. I'm actually British and grew up in England, Ghana, Australia, and Canada, and so on. But always had an awareness of Dylan Thomas, poetry my siblings didn't have. And even as a kid, I was writing poetry. And here's a little embarrassing story about me. In grade school, we had a school-wide poetry contest. When they announced the winner, I think it was grade 8 or something like that. They announced the winners. I won all 3 of the honorable mentions. And I won 3rd prize and 2nd prize and 1st prize. I swept the entire thing, which is a kind of validation, I think, that it sort of gets you going. You know, you might be onto something here. Anyway, just an awareness of poetry. And then I learned about haiku in high school and I would say I was superficially taught, let's put it that way. as I think most people are when they encounter haiku in grade school. Um, but it appealed to me. And I also had closet interest in Taoism and Zen, and would read about that and would encounter haiku in those contexts, and gradually became more and more aware of it. And after first learning about haiku in high school, I wrote it regularly, along with everything else that I wrote. And it wasn't special yet, but it was something I did regularly. And all of my haiku had titles, which Japanese haiku do not have. They were all rigidly 575, and I had no awareness of any other targets that haiku benefit from. But then I discovered Cor Vandenhoevel's haiku anthology. Second edition was published in 1986, and I bought a copy in 1987. And I was startled by the fact that most of the poems did not follow a 575 pattern. In fact, I even counted them all, and I think it was 88.2% or something like that. Mm-hmm. And I had to internalize why. What were they aiming at that was haiku if it wasn't the syllable count? And loosely, they were paying attention to seasonal reference, or kigo, or the two-part structure, which is equivalent to Japanese called a kireji, or cutting word. It divides a poem into two parts, objective sensory imagery, and a bunch of other targets that I knew nothing about until I encountered that book. And a dramatic thing happened with my own haiku at that time. And I can trace this in my notebooks, sort of down to the day where my poems changed. I shifted from thinking about form to thinking about content. What was I saying rather than what bucket am I filling? And it radically improved my haiku. And I sent my very first submission of haiku to Robert Spies of Modern Haiku, 1988, and got a crisp dollar bill for my very first acceptance back when the Modern Haiku used it. And I still have that dollar bill. And again, it's another validation. And still had much to learn, and still learning. And more recent years, I know many of the essays and things that I've written are helping others learn as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the next stuff you wanted to read is haiku. Why don't we read a few of those? The First Snow. I think you have to pull it up on your screen share too. Yeah.
Yeah, this is a set of some of my better known haiku, and there are Japanese translations here by Emiko Miyashita, who's my translation partner. My wife is Japanese, but I'm not fluent in Japanese. I need help, so whenever I've done translation projects, it's always with Emiko. And this, she's done some translations here that are, for those who can see it on screen, you'll be able to see that, but those listening, you'll just have to imagine it. So this is First Snow, a set of, it's a dozen haiku. First snow. Children's hangers clatter in the closet. This is a memory of living in Winnipeg in the long snowy winters there. Toll booth lit for Christmas. From my hand to hers, warm change. This was inspired by the toll booth on the San Mateo Bridge in the San Francisco area. First star. Seashell held to my baby's ear. This poem won grand prize in a special Basho haiku contest in Japan for English language poems. And they translated it into Japanese, not the translation that I'm sharing on screen. And my wife looked at it and said, they didn't translate your poem. They translated the meaning of the poem. And she said that the translation that they had rendered was, first star, the shape of the baby's ear is like the shape of the seashell.
Oh, wow.
which is what I'm trying to imply, but the translation in the Japanese gave it away, which was an interesting thing. But yeah, you want to leave something out of a haiku so that it can be picked up by the reader. An old woolen sweater taken yarn by yarn from the snowbank. I have a question for you. What season do you think this is?
I'd say winter.
Well, that's the obvious thing, but why would an old woolen sweater be taken yarn by yarn? So this is a question I raise when I give haiku workshops,
Mm-hmm.
and usually someone will pipe up and say, "Oh, it's a bird building a nest. It's a spring poem."
Hmm.
So the snowbank is melting. But I take a risk with that. You know, you may not get there with this poem. An old woolen sweater taken by yarn from the snowbank. You may not jump to the fact that this is a bird. So I take a risk with that. But when you see faces light up when they get this poem, to me that risk is worth it. Tulip Festival. Colors of all the cars. Parking lot. It's inspired by the Skagit Valley Tulip Festival north of Seattle. Spring breeze. Full of her hand as we near the pet store. What age do you picture in this poem?
A young child, I'd say.
So, yes, I think most people do, and yet it doesn't actually say. So, where does that feeling come from? And I think it comes from our association with puppies and kittens at a pet store and how kids like that. But it's also, I think, in the lightness of breeze and the youthfulness of spring.
Hmm.
And the fact is that this was actually written in June. My adult girlfriend going to a coffee shop. But what inspired it was the pull of her hand and the energy of that. Usually I walked faster than her, and she was pulling my hand, wanting to get to a little place where it was foggy in Palo Alto, and she wanted to get inside a warm coffee shop. But the pull of her hand arrested, and it felt right to change details to tell a different kind of truth. Scattered petals, thud, my books, book drop. So I'll just talk briefly about haiku theory. Obviously, the petals would be the seasonal reference, and then I use the ellipsis to mark the cut, the division between the two parts. And then we have the second part, it's the juxtaposition, the thud of my books and the book drop. Well, that'll tell you it's a library setting. And yet, what is the connection between these two things? And I think that's a fundamental aspect of haiku. When you have the two parts juxtaposed, they immediately pose a question. What does part A have to do with part B? And I think it's the reader's job to intuit that. In this case, falling petals, or maybe like falling books, except that one is light and one is heavy. So there's contrast as well as comparison. And I'm trying to evoke a feeling. Whatever the feeling you might get from it comes from the objective description of facts. And I like to say in my workshops, don't write about your feelings. Instead, write about what caused your feelings. And I recently read Louise Gluck's Proofs and Theories essays, and I love a section of that where she says a good poem, and this applies to haiku, but also longer poem, good poem should summon feeling, not impose it, or summon thought, not impose it. And that's, I think, a key aspect of haiku. Summer moonlight, potter's wheel slows. This This won second prize in a haiku contest once, and the first prize winner was a 14-year-old, and I've wondered who that was ever since. So I never saw any of his work ever again.
Do you remember the haiku?
No, I don't. But it was for the Boston Haiku Society contest in 1990. So this is an old poem. Crackling beach fire, hum, place of words you can't recall. Involved in meteor shower, gentle wave wets our sandals. I like the up and downness of this. You know, maybe there's a tide shifting here that's wetting our sandals. And we're so busy looking up the celestial objects that we realize the tide has changed. Of course, it's celestial objects like the moon that causes those tides. So after the quake, weather vane pointing to Earth. It's inspired by 1989 Loma Prieta earthquake. I think about 60 people in San Francisco area I lived through. Home for Christmas. My childhood desk drawer.
Yeah,
so there's some haiku.
Yeah, thanks so much. There was a great lesson in haiku right there. And we have a lot of questions too already from the audience, because I'd like to, teach everybody more about haiku as much as we can in this segment of the show. And first of all, so CB99 Videos, who's Carla Schwartz, asks, do you believe that all haiku must imply a season? And that's the question we get. I mean, if you ask that middle school version of haiku, right? It's the 575 and then the season word, and that's what they tell you.
If you're lucky.
If you're lucky.
Yeah, they sometimes don't even get to the seasonal reference.
Yeah, so we talked about we talked with Richard Gilbert about the way in that episode, and the way that there's really no way to do season in English in the same way as in Chinese, because there's these whole tomes that describe which words relate to which seasons. There's this whole history. But do you think that there's still a reason to include a season in every haiku?
So in Japan, a traditional haiku, some schools of haiku in Japan require it. If it doesn't have a season word, doesn't qualify. It's fail. There are other schools in Japan that say, well, it doesn't always have to have a season word. And an interesting distinction is some people teach haiku as a nature poem, and that's not really accurate either. That it's really the seasonal aspect that the haiku is after. So you could refer to, say, Christmas or Japanese festival of Tanabata, and it's not nature, but it's still seasonal, and that counts. So I like to think of targets for haiku instead of rules. So a good target for haiku is to have a seasonal reference that anchors the poem in time and alludes to other poems and has other benefits. It makes it more present here and now, etc. Personal. So to me, a seasonal word is an opportunity, not an obligation.
Mm-hmm.
And if you write a poem and it's really good without a season word, don't mess with it. Like it might be an indoor poem. Leave it alone. But on the other hand, if it feels flat, maybe adding a seasonal reference of some kind can give it the energy it needs. So that's how I like to think of it, as an opportunity. There are plenty of examples of haiku in English that do not have seasonal references, but I think work perfectly well.
Mm-hmm. And then along similar lines, Katie Dozier asks, what is the difference between using ellipses versus an em dash after scattered petals? So we talk about that cut. How do you choose which? I know in Japanese, there's actually different words that signify the punctuation, and so it's very clear what they're doing. But how do you determine whether a colon or a dash or nothing at all, like some of those haiku had? How do you decide which to do? What's the difference between a colon and a dash?
it's not rolling the dice. There is intentionality behind it. A dash for me is more instant, more immediate. Like this is happening right at the same time as the other thing, whereas an ellipsis has a bit of a break, sort of a longer pause for me anyway. And I think that's generally what most readers of haiku in journals like Modern Haiku or Frog Pond they'll apprehend that slower pause with an ellipsis. There are also some haiku poets that use no punctuation at all because the pause is actually inherent in the grammar. So, meteor shower, it's a fragment, it's one thing. A gentle wave wets our sandals. That's split over 2 lines, but it's grammatically separate from the first part. So the pause is actually there. I choose to mark cut punctuation. And I'll most often use an em dash or an ellipsis, or sometimes an indent in place of punctuation. Pretty rarely any other kind of punctuation. But like in Japanese, they will have I think there's 18 different cutting words. For example, in Basho's famous Old Pond poem, first line is Furuike ya. And ya is the cutting word. Furuike is Old Pond. And ya is the cutting word. Kana is another common one. Keri, and there's quite a few others. And they've been described as emotional shading. And you can see that same kind of effect in that an exclamation mark is going to be more intense than a comma, obviously. Mm-hmm. And there's other overtones to the cutting words in Japanese. So I choose to mark it, and I will choose one particular mark over another depending on how long I want you to think about it or how instant the connection is between the two parts. Mm-hmm. Or like in the one poem I read earlier, The Scattered Petals, the thud of my books in the book drop, I used the ellipsis in that one because I wanted you to dwell on that. But I also thought dots of the ellipsis are sort of petal-like. And that can become old pretty quickly, but that's what motivated that partly.
Uh-huh. Yeah, so it's kind of in a way feel too, in the same way line breaks might be with a more traditional poem. And on the same sort of topic, does every haiku have to have a cut? Is that something that's universal to all haiku, and it's like degrees of cut along a continuum of like how sharp it is, or is it like can you have a haiku with no cut whatsoever?
Yes, you can. What you really want to avoid is a haiku with 2 cuts or more than 2 parts, and that's a beginner pitfall, I think. It's each line is grammatically separate, and you want to have just one cut between 2 parts only. However, this is the trick, and this is a little bit more complicated, and it's perhaps a more advanced thing in haiku, is in Japan, you can end a haiku with a cutting word. And kana is the most common way to do that. And I think of Busan, a lot of his haiku end with kana. And by having the cut at the end of the poem, it allows you to make it a 1-part poem. And so the cut is still there, but it's cut with something. The cut is between the poem and something outside the poem. Mm-hmm. And if you think back to the poem, An Old Woolen Sweater Taken Yarn by Yarn from the Snowbank, it's one phrase. It is a 1-part poem. And it is equivalent, I like to think, to having the cutting word at the end of the poem to imply something outside the poem, in this case, bird building the nest. Whether everybody gets there, that's the risk I take. But that is an example of a 1-part poem that many other people do too. And I've seen some people look at haiku and say, well, this has only 1 part. You have to have a cut. Well, no, not necessarily.
Yeah, that's interesting.
There's plenty of precedent for 1-part poems in Japanese. Mm-hmm. But again, it's an opportunity. Could the poem be improved by giving it a juxtaposition, create the energy and space between the two parts. So that's a choice to consider.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting, but it seems like that's still juxtaposition though, because even if you're putting the cut at the very end, and almost like an ellipses, you're implying some other context going further after the poem finishes. There's still a juxtaposition between what's going on and what's not. So there's still a sense of movement.
Yeah.
It feels necessary to me. I was trying to think of any poems. I mean, even like a poem like Tundra, the one word on the page has like a implication between the page itself and the word. I couldn't think of any that I've ever come across that have just sort of a oneness to it. Is there like anything that you can think of that has a oneness, or is that just is a juxtaposition like central to the haiku?
It's pretty central. I agree. It's uncommon. With some research, I know I could find some in Japanese and English. The Tundra poem, to me, speaking of that, it's word on an otherwise blank page. It's for me like a stone that's emerging from melting snow. So for me, it's a spring poem. And all that expanse of snow of the white page is just starting to melt, and we're seeing the stone. That's a very personal interpretation. And somebody else may see it in a completely non-physical way, purely, say, an intellectual way. Subtleties of tundra.
Yeah.
Whatever that is, the small world of the botany and everything else that goes on in tundra landscapes. It's subtle.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, for me, I always thought of that as the like a whiteout blizzard, like we'd have back on the shores of Lake Ontario when I was a kid, and you could only see like your hand in front of your face, but nothing else. And so the tundra's emerging out of that. It's really cool to think of it as spring melt too. That's really neat.
Well, there's the poet Seisen Sui referred to haiku as an unfinished poem, meaning that we as readers have the opportunity to finish the poem, their own experience, and it's the holding of things in haiku that allows us as readers to fill in the story, fill in. You take your Lake Ontario experience to it. Can't say I've had spring in the tundra experience myself, but that's what I project onto the poem.
Yeah, just it's so interesting and great lessons already. I mean, people are saying it up and down the comments section. We should tackle the 575 issue, because what I was applying before is every time we publish haiku in Rattle, like 6 people email me and say, that's not a haiku, it's not 575, and I give them the link to your essay. We haven't mentioned yet, but right now is National Haiku Writing Month, and the logo that you use for I don't know if you still use it, but for a long time you used the no 575, like the not don't do that symbol.
the slash through the numbers.
Yeah, and so so why no 575 instead of just, you don't have to 575? Like, what's the difference between no and
I'll clarify. So that symbol is polemical. It's designed to make people think. And running NaHaiWriMo, National Haiku Writing Month, for 13 years, and I think it's hostile to some people. We receive it hostilely, and I don't mean that. And I actually am okay with some haiku being 575. What I'm trying to point out with that symbol is that too many people think that all you have to do is count syllables. And if you've got 575, you've got a haiku. Pat yourself on the back. Never mind that it's about, picking up litter in the park or whatever your subject is. And in Japan, they literally have police signs that are 575. Nobody confuses them with haiku, but it's a natural rhythm in the language. In Japan, okay, so an example would be hototogisu, which is cuckoo. And hototogisu it uses up 5 of the sounds right away, and all it does is name the bird. But in English, we would say cuckoo and still have 3 syllables left if we wanted to fill a 5-syllable line. So we could add extra words: empty, cuckoo's nest. So I'm adding an extra noun, I'm telling you it's empty, and I'm adding a possessive. So I'm adding a lot more information. And the nature of Japanese words is that every consonant has a vowel sound with it. Occasionally there'll be 2 doubled consonants, like the word nippon has two P's in the middle when it's spelled out in English. But what they count is not syllables. It has never been syllables, ever. And so the idea that haiku should be 575 syllables in English is, I would call it an urban myth. And just to demonstrate that further, we have the word jo, and in Japanese, think of the word jo, not jo, which is kind of longer, but just jo. All Japanese syllables are like that, except for the letter N, which ends some words. That's counted as a separate sound. So we can say jo or jo if we want, but we can change that sound and say joy, joy. And it's still one syllable, but the sound has elided. We have now left behind all Japanese syllables, every single one of them, except for that N sound, which is an oddity, and the doubling of two consonants. But we can add an S to that word and say joys. We're even further away from Japanese syllables. Or we can, instead of a Z sound, we can make it S sound and say Joyce. Or we can go even further and say joist. And even further and say joists. And we're a long, long way from what is counted in the Japanese haiku. That little syllabet is a term that I think Robin Gill, a translator, uses. That really they're counting sounds. The word is on, not syllables. And there's been much written about this, about how they're just different. A friend a couple of years ago, she published a book of haiku by in Tokyo by Kodansha, and in her introduction, she said, if you are writing 17 syllables in English, that's sometimes enough for 2 haiku in Japanese. So, with all that being said, I'm trying to point out that this attention on 575 is actually to the detriment of other targets that are more important, that people don't learn. The cutting word, the seasonal reference, the objective sensory imagery, allusion, and there are various other techniques like the pivot, where something can mean 2 things at once in between. And there are other techniques, and these are all obscured by, this rigid focus on 575. That being said, if you choose to write a 575, it can still work, provided you hit the other targets, provided you're aware of the fact that it's likely to be much longer poem than a typical Japanese haiku. So not everyone's persuaded. That's fine. So choose to write 575 if you want, but please try to be aware of the other targets. That's all I ask.
Yeah. Well, I always think of to me, haiku, it seems like 2 worlds in one breath might be how you think of it. And that one breath aspect, do you think, I know a lot of people think that the one breath is ruined by having that many syllables and that long. It's no longer one breath if you have as long as what is an American sentence. And do you subscribe to that? Do you think it just feels like it's too much to have that many syllables?
Yeah, I have an essay about this called The Heft of Haiku, where I use the metaphor that a haiku in Japan is like a baseball, and it's got a certain size to it. Whereas if you write 575 in English, it's a bigger ball. And it's just different. And if you want to have about the same heft, this is the idea of, you just say kuku and you're equivalent to hototogisu, because most Japanese words have more sounds per concept than the English equivalent, as a general rule, as an average. So if you want to write, softball-sized poems, that's your choice, but be aware that it's a different heft compared to the lighter, more delicate or more subtle, or more limited heft of the Japanese poem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then I guess to follow up, just not to beat this topic to death, but why do you think that people are so drawn to counting syllables? Do you think there's a reason? I've asked everybody this. Everybody has a different kind of opinion, but it's definitely like people like doing the haiku in the way that is just, count on my fingers. Yeah. And then, if you ask for a haiku contest and send the haiku to the Mars, it's probably going to be 575 that they pick at NASA.
Well,
so
I think it's mildly satisfying. You fill the bucket and you pat yourself on the back. It's paint by numbers. Um, it's perhaps a starting point. I actually don't like to start haiku that way, but I never teach it that way as a starting point. But I know a lot of people do.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I don't know. I think it's one of those things you learn in school and you put it in a box. This is haiku. I've learned it. This is all there is to it. And it just, people, what puzzles me is why some people are so adamant about saying, when they see something that's not 575, they'll complain about it.
Mm-hmm.
They'll wag their finger, or they'll, want to send their armies out to get you. Because you clearly don't know what haiku is if it's not 575. And you can spin wheels about this a lot, but to me, I'm more concerned about, is it a good poem? Is it a good short poem? Regardless of whether it's a haiku or a gendai modern haiku or some other kind of haiku. And there's lots of varieties: sci-fi haiku, horror haiku, and there are many other genres that one can dabble in. Is it a good short poem? That matters to me more than whether it's a haiku or humorous version, senryu, which is another debate.
Yeah. So if you don't mind, we keep talking about haiku because people are learning so much, and all the listeners are. I don't know what percentage of listeners already know all this stuff, but I think it's the majority probably don't. So another question is about rhyming in haiku. Who is it that asked that? Yeah. So Mark Grinier says, I've seen prohibitions against using rhymes and similar sounding words in haiku. What do you think about that?
My sense is that if the rhyme is obvious, it kind of overshadows the poem. If it's subtle or natural, then there's nothing wrong with it, but don't let it be too strong. If I start saying, it's the last day of June, and I am about to swoon, I just hit you over the head with a rhyme, whereas there are other ways that are much more subtle and quiet, and if they're natural, there's no problem with it. Something to be aware of too is that in Japanese, all words end with a vowel or that end sound. So every single word in the entire Japanese, other than end endings, will end with one of 5 vowels, and they're all said exactly the same way: a, I, u, e, o. There's no long or short vowels like we have in English. So every word is going to end with one of those 6 sounds. And so rhyme is actually extremely common in Japanese poetry or Japanese speech, but nobody hears it. They're not sensitive to it because it's so utterly common. And in fact, when my daughter, she's 17 now, I think, when she was first getting into anime and learning all these Japanese songs, so on, I asked her, do any of these rhyme? And she said, no. She was surprised I would even ask.
Uh-huh.
All these Japanese songs, they don't rhyme. Sometimes there may be exceptions, obviously, but yeah, it's just whatever. If you want to rhyme in haiku, be aware that it can overshadow the poem. And I'm forgetting who said this. A haiku is like a finger pointing to the moon. And if the finger is bejeweled, no longer see them. And a rhyme to me is too often like a jewel on the finger. And any other kind of poetic device risks being a jewel on the finger, like a heavy metaphor or simile. It can point to the cleverness of the poet rather than getting the poet out of the way to pull as directly as possible to the experience or the image. So you want to see the moon. You can't help but still have a finger because that's what a poetry is. It is a finger. It's pointing at something, but you want to see what it's pointing at as directly as possible without jewels in the finger. On the other hand, there are probably those who love the jewels and they write a different sort of poem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I think one more question. There's a bunch of people have asked questions about particular things. I think your answer in general was just, if it works as a short poem, it's a target, not a rule. But two other people asked about the difference between haiku and senryu. So is that is it a distinction that you think is significant, and how would you define the two?
That is I think more of a concern for those who are writing haiku in English than it is for those in Japan. My perception of them is that if haiku is a finger pointing at the moon, senju is a finger poking you in the ribs. That if a haiku is reverent, senju is irreverent. A haiku celebrates something, and it could be a dark subject, a very dark subject, but it recognizes it and holds it up on a platter, whereas a senju kind of throws it at you, and is where a haiku is reverent, the senju is irreverent. That points out a tone difference, a difference in tone, and for me, a haiku. Where a haiku celebrates a subject, the senju could be said to poke fun at it, to have a victim of some sort. It could be yourself, you're making fun of yourself, or you're pointing out a human foible of some kind. That is a tonal difference as well. Some people say that if it lacks a season word, it's a senju. I don't believe that at all, because there's plenty of haiku that don't have season words that work perfectly well. Some people say that if it has a human in it, it's a senju. Again, I disagree with that, because there's plenty of humans in haiku in Japanese. And I think of Busan's famous poem, Autumn Chill, I step on my dead wife's comb, which to me is very chilling. And he's totally present in it, and his wife is present in it. And you'll see lots of other poems. If you read Jisei, or the tradition of the death poem that people write just before they know they're about to die, there's a rich tradition of that among samurai, for example. The great majority of those poems make references to the self. It's just, you don't have to avoid that. And yet it's still haiku. So human content or not, humor versus not, season word versus not, depending on which one it is, it may sort of tend to be more senju than not. But it's not any one of those things. But ultimately, to me, it's a matter of tone, and whether one is pointing at the moon or poking you in the ribs.
Yeah, it's a good distinction, and maybe an unnecessary one in a lot of ways. And I think, I don't know, and if I remember right, in Frog Pond, the journal, and in Modern Haiku, I think, don't they just say haiku and senru and don't really distinguish between the two? Is that because
don't segregate them?
Yes, that's what I mean.
At least currently.
Yeah, and I think that's like a fun way to read, not knowing which one you're going to get. It sort of helps the balance between those two moods that you were talking about. So I really like reading them that way.
It empowers you as the reader. You get to decide if you want to, rather than having the distinction forced upon you. So when it used to be Frog Pond would segregate them for a couple of years under one editor. And frequently I'd think, well, that's a haiku, not a senju, or vice versa. Usually the senju I thought were haiku.
Yeah, interesting.
More often than the other way around.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm being distracted by this. Whereas if they're just not segregated, I just enjoy them as poems without having to worry about the category.
Yeah.
So I think that's a better way to read poetry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Well, this has been like a condensed, maybe one of the best condensed lessons in poetry, or in haiku that anybody's had probably watching this. Let's do another poem. So the next one is a poem that you wrote written after a haiku. Let's read that one, and then we'll talk some more.
Okay, this is called Flowers on the Roof of Hell, and it begins with an Issa poem, from which I take the title. He wrote, "In this world, walk on the roof of hell, gazing at flowers." And Issa was one of the four great masters of haiku in Japan. And in this poem, I imagine visiting, or that he's visiting me. So here we go. Today, Issa came over for dinner. Nothing fancy, just Thai takeout from the place down the road. He came on foot carrying a satchel I welcomed him at the door, and he removed his sandals. The low evening sun sparkled through the tall glass of water I gave him. He admired it, for he drank it one go. I showed him to the living room, where he sat on the couch almost delicately. Then, as if conscious of his bare feet, curled them up under himself. We talked of poetry all through dinner, stray noodles landing on the plain wooden table as we ate. We talked of favorite poets and poems, the challenge of writing freshly about old subjects. We talked of writing one's joy, fiercely crushed world, flowers on the roof of hell. When he told me it was time for him to go, I asked if I could give him a ride. He declined, as I knew he would. He had a long way to travel, but held a finger to his lips, gently shook his smile. Then Isa took his sandals in hand, padded off to the dark. I opened the satchel he left behind. Beside it, white asters.
And that was Flowers on the Roof of Hell by Michael Dillon Welch. And so one of the things I wanted to talk about was the way that haiku is unusual as a genre, and that the community is very separated from the rest of the literary community that's publishing mainstream so-called poetry. And why do you think that is? We talking to Richard Gilbert again. He feels like there's this haiku spirit, that there's such a joy in haiku, that there's such a sense of community within haiku that it's hard to leave. And here's a poem that's a traditional free verse poem, written after haiku, but that you've written here. Why do you think that the haiku community is so close knit, first of all, and then how do you feel leaving that community that you've helped build?
Well, I don't know that doing longer poetry feels like leaving it. It's sort of a continuum. I know Billy Collins once said that there's a lot of existential gratitude in haiku. And I think that's a fundamental way that people who write haiku deeply as a literary art, how they feel. There's just this constant existential gratitude. And there's a line from Mary Oliver that I love to quote that I think applies to haiku, even though she wasn't saying so. Instructions for living a life. Pay attention. That's where haiku starts. Be astonished. And that's the existential gratitude that you're either born with or whatever. And then she says, tell about it. Pay attention, be astonished, tell about it. And that to me is the haiku life. And if you're wired that way, notice things all the time. And other people, everybody notices things. Of course, it's not a special trait, but a haiku poet will notice ordinary things and be astonished by them and point them out. So, whatever the ordinary thing is that you write your haiku about, suddenly thinking of Jack Kane's very simple poem, An Empty Elevator. Opens, closes. The fundamental mystery of press the button, where did they go? And that's an indoor poem, so no season word is necessary. I think it would destroy the poem. But it has this fundamental mystery. It still has two parts. An empty elevator opens, and a pause, closes. So I don't know. You're wired for this, or you're not, perhaps. I think it's a natural community that those who write haiku are just drawn to each other. I feel like a kinship with people that I know from Australia, New Zealand, India, South Africa, Portugal, all over Europe, Japan, obviously. Even to the point that I might even be able to stay in their house if I visited, that they're otherwise strangers. There's that closeness. But here's the other thing, the other side of the coin, is that I also think this is a bad thing. I think haiku poets put themselves in a ghetto. Mm-hmm. They keep themselves in a ghetto. They keep to their own journals. They don't send their poems out. And I'm guilty of this too. It's easy to send my haiku to the haiku journals. But, keep ourselves in the ghetto by doing that. And if we send our poems out to non-haiku places, it might break down this this difference. I'm suddenly thinking of something I remember Annie Finch said. She said, haiku poets are touchy. And I think that's true. But some of us, like me, sometimes will get bent out of shape trying to explain the 575 business. And, it makes us seem touchy. So we're kind of people, they want to push us away. That's our own fault. That's how we put ourselves in a ghetto. There are exceptions to that, in that I think, especially in recent years, haibun, prose with haiku, is much more widely accepted in mainstream poetry journals. There are sequences that are published here and there. Some of them are, Poetry Magazine will publish haiku sequences, but they're all perfectly 575 and seem not always with an awareness of other techniques, but not always, there are exceptions, but mostly what's written as haiku seems to be unaware of what the haiku community is aware of. And we have the danger of feeling holier than thou, and I think that's wrong. But we have the ongoing challenge of how do we share the light that we think we have? Do we have light that others don't? Even that is a presumption that's arrogant. And I don't know how to deal with that, but more sensitivity to it from people who think they know haiku would help. And in this sense, I'm really grateful for Rattle, because you're one of the few, fairly well-established, well-respected poetry journals that is not just sympathetic to haiku, sympathetic to a deeper understanding of haiku beyond syllable count. So thank you for that, and thank you for your Japanese forms issue a few years ago.
Yeah, well, I was going to say that it was one of the things I thought that once we did a Japanese forums issue, that we'd start to get submissions all over the place from haiku poets and say, oh, Rattle appreciates haiku, and we really don't. I mean, Deborah Kaloji submits, and George Swede, you do, Roberta Beery does, but outside of a few people, we've never gotten submissions from a whole lot of people that you see, and I really admire all over the haiku community. And so just if anybody's watching, please do send haiku, because we love haiku.
So I think one thing that's part of that is that because so many haiku poets are in the ghetto, sort of, they know their haiku journals, and there's a lot to keep up with, and it's hard to keep up with it all. And they don't write longer poetry, so they're not moving in non-haiku circles. They may never hear of Rattle, or seldom. They would never hear of other journals, like I think of Hummingbird, a journal for short poetry, that was started by Phyllis Walsh. She was very, very open to haiku poetry. Journals like that are sort of on the fringe of haiku, even those don't necessarily get people from the haiku community submitting to them. So I think this is how I think haiku poets need to get out of their ghetto. And I admire Debbie Kaloji for what she does. I mean, she's constantly sending her haiku to non-haiku markets. And even at a Haiku North America conference, she gave a workshop on places to send your haiku that are not in the haiku community. Rattle being one of them.
Yeah. Well, yeah, definitely. And I hope people do, because I always look for them, and I love them when they're good. Like I love all poetry when it's good, but there's something special about haiku, and the difference between, a lot of times we get another complaint we always get just about regular poems that we usually publish is they're so dark, and I never thought of it that way, but that's a thing, that there's a appreciation and a gratitude that comes in so many haiku that's almost a contrast to a lot of what more traditional poets are writing. But on the other side too, I want to say that I remember when Poetry Magazine first published, I saw a post that everybody was talking about. I don't know whose post it was, but I remember someone saying, they finally published haiku, and it's not even haiku, and everybody was just, and I looked at it, and it wasn't. I mean, it had no juxtaposition at all, and it was 575. It was a short poems written in that stanza form, I guess you could say. So I understand being frustrated and felt like you're not being recognized or noticed for what's actually going on. So I see both sides of it. Just hope people do send us stuff.
Well, I hope you get more of it. And I need to wag the finger at myself. I need to send you more of my haiku and other poems myself.
Yeah, well, we've been talking a lot, and let's. I want to read more poems too. We've been talking and teaching so much, which really a lot of people are appreciating. But I want to read a few more poems, so let's do another one, Michael.
So I have a list of poems. Should I curtail the list so that we get them done, get certain ones done in time?
Yeah, we could do 2 or 3 more. So whatever you want to do, because I know you have to go about 45 minutes or so. But
okay,
we're gonna go before that. We 15 or 20 more minutes, I'd say.
Okay, so here's a poem called Matador. Skipping ahead in the list I gave you. If I were as important as Billy Collins, I'd write about fertilizer, maybe belly button lint. I'd find some sort of epiphany and throw it in near the end of the poem, or maybe just give the thing a twist so readers feel disoriented, as if I'd driven them to the edge of town, left them by a cornfield dark of night. I'd steal from other writers with the arrogant presumption that my esteemed readers will catch on. Mention suicide and rising tides and chicken bones left on a broken plate to tantalize with accessible inscrutability. And then I'd meander off with a flip of the hand, waving my cape in the wind, as if my audience wasn't as colorblind as a bull stuck with whatever that thing is you stick bulls with.
Yeah, great ending on that. That was Matador, another poem by Michael Dillon Welch. Let's see. So we have a lot more. Just people want to talk about haiku, and there's a lot of questions about it too. So Carlos Schwartz again says, since you mentioned haibun, can a haibun be followed by a senru rather than a haiku? And how?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, do with it what you like. Any combination of poems. You can have 3 haiku to start, or a haiku and a senru to start, and then no haiku at the end. There's even I've written an essay about haibun without any haiku at all.
Oh, interesting.
But where just the prose has that poetic. It's almost like a prose poem, actually. But there's an example written in the 1700s of haibun with a set of haibun where some of them had no haiku at all.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it could be a senyu. There's a new term that's come up in the last 10 or so years called tanka prose, where it's haibun, but instead of a haiku, you use a tanka. So that's a variation too.
Mm-hmm.
And I mentioned Mary Ruefle earlier. I'm reading her book of essays, Madness, Rack, and Honey. And several of the essays, just in the middle of the paragraphs, she'll suddenly just name an image. And it's sort of like completely out of left field. And you go back to the essay. And there's no logic to it. But it has this energy to it that is totally like haibun, that linking and shifting between the prose and the poem. So have at it. Go for it.
And then what about all the other forms? You mentioned tanka, which is a 5-line sort of a version of a haiku. There's so many different forms. And we sort of focus on haiku mostly. We call it the haiku community. There's the haiku foundation. But there's so many different forms, the renge and the renku and all the different linked versions and the collaborative versions. Why do you think haiku is the one that stands out as the one we talk about most, first of all?
I think because it's unique. It's more of a novelty, or at least it began that way. I founded the Tanka Society of America in 2000. I also write a lot of tanka. I took a break and I've come back as president. So I'm still into it. Tanka is much more like Western poetry. It's metaphor and simile and overt mention of emotion that a haiku doesn't. And I think it's that uniqueness, the restrictions of haiku that make it different from Western poetry. And I think that helps elevate it, makes it more attractive. I don't know. A favorite quote by Roland Barthes is, he says, haiku has this rather phantasmagorical property that we always suppose we can write such things easily.
Hmm.
I love that quote because haiku look easy. I think that's part of its appeal. It looks easy. And some teachers teach it as a way to, an entry point into poetry, or an entry point into understanding syllables, if that's what they're using it for. And unfortunately, I think a lot of people associate haiku, because it's short, with children, that it's children's poetry, which is unfortunate. But if that's where it stops, but I think that easy accessibility is part of its appeal. Whereas if you sit down somebody who's never written poetry before and say, "Hey, write a sonnet or write a villanelle," it's going to be a lot harder for them. Whereas the haiku, just for brevity's sake alone, is going to be easier to start.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's a question here, and I wanted to. So here's first the question from Lisa Dealin. She says, "What is your feeling about taking the liberty of writing a long-form application of haiku by creating a through line that moves through multiple haiku as a single poem?" And two of the poems that we published of yours, Separation and is it True Colors, I think is the title, used through lines where one word is repeated like that.
Yeah.
I also wanted to, it wasn't in the packet, but you sent me those online books, the eyeball kick, and those with the hydrogen jukebox, which I thought was really fascinating. Would you mind? Can you pull that up? One of those books, like maybe is it possible to pull it up quickly where you are? Maybe eyeball kick or something like that.
Let me see how quickly. Talk amongst yourselves.
Yeah, but these are fascinating. I mean, and all four books have the same through line. Speaking of whether or not Michael believes in having a through line, so
the distinction I would make there is that it's not I've seen some longer poems where it's one long poem, but it has haiku-like stanzas. Sam Hamill has done this, for example, and I think Hayden, is it Hayden Carruth? Or I'm forgetting who else has done it. But that's different from whatever I've done. What I've done is I've repeated a word in several sequences, and there's still sequences, and that's the difference, I think, is that there are sequences of short poems. The hydrogen jukebox phrase that I repeat, I consider this to be short poetry. I don't consider it to be haiku, but here's an example. This is I made a trilogy of these little ebooks, and this is the fourth of the trilogy, and it's called Ocular Oracle. And I'll just for those who can't see it, I'm sorry you're missing all the beautiful colored images that go with it. But here's one of the poems. Hydrogen jukebox. Simultaneously, our pens run out of ink. And there's a deliberate leap. And so it's haiku-like, deliberate leap between one part and the other part. So it still retains that. And our pen's running out of ink. That's experiential. So that's haiku-like, I guess. But I don't consider these to be haiku, mainly because I don't care. But anyway, on the next page, there are two poems. Hydrogen jukebox, all the elements of style. If you're a Strunk and White fan. Hydrogen jukebox, the screams of ants. What does that mean? It's deliberately surreal. And then on the next page, I have three poems. Hydrogen jukebox, frog, fog. If you can tell me what this means, please do. And I'm just playing here, and I'm using this idea of the eyeball kick from Allen Ginsberg, and he used the particular phrase "hydrogen jukebox" and Howl as an example of this. This idea of two juxtaposed words that give you a double take. That's what he means by eyeball kick. What does hydrogen have to do with jukebox? It's deliberately beyond logic. And then I'm choosing to try and I try to extend this by putting that phrase with various other things in an extended sequence. And on my website, you find the 4 ebooks interspersed with different color images between each. There's a 1 poem, then 2 poems, and 3, then an image, and then it repeats.
Mm-hmm.
So there's many dozens of these poems, and it's to me it's tapping into play with language more than anything else. And in this case, getting myself out of the way. So in other poems, I have intention, I have sort of a trope or some sort of maybe even a gimmick or a point of view or a message or a story, something else that's driving the poem. In these poems, the hydrogen jukeboxes, I don't know what's driving them except a repeated phrase. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
And repeated phrase and the energy it might create something mysterious that I pair it with. Hydrogen jukebox, license plate factory out of metal. We can imagine a license plate factory being out of metal. That's easy enough. And we might think of a prison. What does that have to do with hydrogen jukebox?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. And it's that embracing of the not knowing. There's a Buddhist term for that. The Buddha is not knowing. That if you are like a teacup that's empty, only then can you receive tea. So I'm sort of saying, be confused, or maybe not confused, be mystified and dwell in that mystery. That's what I'm trying to do with these.
Yeah, it's very interesting. It feels to me like a big leap past in the same direction of the poems like Separation, where you have the same word repeated so many times from different angles and different uses, like Separation is in that, where it starts to sort of feel strange, even though it's so familiar. It sort of makes the familiar strange. And then this goes even farther because it starts strange and makes it even like more strange than strange. And it kind of pushes that idea of just sound being sound as far as it can go almost. So I find it really fascinating.
So I think that's true. If you've ever done this as a kid, you pick a word and just say it over and over again 100 times, and it loses its meaning. And you sort of have to consciously think about the word to have it regain its meaning. And I think that's part of the process that goes on with these poems. So you see it over and over again, you sort of gloss over it. But if you slow down and think, okay, here's another example. Hydrogen jukebox for snoring wakes my consciousness. Not wakes me, wakes my consciousness. So it's conceptual. And I think that plays into the conceptuality of whatever a hydrogen jukebox is. Put your money in a jukebox and get this kind of hydrogen and that kind of hydrogen. Have favorites. You get sick of hearing one. Can you listen to one over and over again? Whatever, wherever it takes you. It's sort of throwing you off the cliff. And I think Robert Bly said this: good poem throws you off a cliff and it sprouts wings before it crashes to the rocks below, or something like that. And I'm just throwing you off the cliff with these poems. Fly or not, however you wish.
Well, that's the one more thing I wanted to talk about. It's just the sense of because haiku are so sort of concise and there's a certain mode of being and a certain way of doing it. How do you manage to do it for so long without sort of it to feel stale? About sort of I get how this works. Do you ever lose that sense of of freshness, and how do you maintain it over the course of writing these short poems? And I think that's an example with the hydrogen jukebox, but can you talk a little about that?
Yeah. So I actually have an essay about this, and it's basically speaks of trying to maintain a sense of wonder. I quote Rachel Carson, who said, if I could grant one wish on all children everywhere, is to maintain that sense of wonder all the way into adulthood. That taps into the idea of existential gratitude. If you have that, there's no end. I mean, it doesn't grow old for me. And I recognize that it might for others, so fine. Um, but to me, okay, in my hands right now, I'm holding a pen, and I can take the cap off or whatever. Or let's say it's a pen that had a clicker. I could write about a pen with a clicker, the sound it makes. That wonderful in a small way. You
Mm-hmm.
know, the small wonders of life. I mean, there's no end to them. Um, I mean, you can write about big wonders too, but um, I don't know. It's sort of a haiku is a celebration of the ordinary, makes it extraordinary. I think pays attention to something we all know, but we forget that we know. And haiku are reminders of what we easily forget.
Hmm.
So I mean, that's what sustains me. Um, um, just to maintain a sense of wonder, and it sort of feeds on itself. By writing haiku, I feed that sense of wonder. And by having a sense of wonder, I feed on haiku, constantly paying attention and being astonished and writing about it. Um, can't help myself.
And what is your process like? Do you write? Do you sit down to write every day? Do you have? Do you just? Are you noticing throughout the day and working on making notes and little haiku
I
then?
I should be so virtuous. Um, so no. Um, I mean, I've had times where I've made a pact with myself to write at least one haiku a day for an entire year. I've done that a few times. Or for National Haiku Writing Month, which is February, the shortest month for the shortest genre of poetry. So we're right now in the middle of it. The goal is to write at least one haiku a day. And there's a few thousand people on the Facebook page. Um, not all of them are doing it, but quite a few are posting every day, and it's great. And that is a habit that I think many people follow. I've written enough that I I don't necessarily do that quite so devotedly anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I don't limit myself to just inspiration and epiphany. Sometimes an idea come to me, and an example. This was long ago. I remember someone saying you should never begin a haiku with a preposition. So for a whole month, all of my haiku began with prepositions because I was trying to prove that rule either right or wrong. And I proved that it's sort of dumb as a rule. Sometimes it can be perfectly fine to start a haiku with a preposition. It depends on the poem. Some failed, some didn't. And so I learned something from doing that. So in that case, I had a goal just to write a lot of haiku, starting with prepositions. You could give yourself an artificial goal, like write haiku using only one syllable words. I don't know. It's just something crazy and silly to do, provided you hit the other targets. I'm going to look at my most recent haiku and read it to you. Looking at my little notebook here. Backwoods walk. The deer carcass starts our conversation. And my original draft here said stops our conversation. And I like starts better because it implies that you weren't talking and now you are. And what kind of comfortable relationship was this? You didn't need to talk. Or what was the tension in the relationship that caused you not to talk? It's open-ended in that sense. So backwoods walk, got a setting. No seasonal word in this, but for me it feels like autumn. The deer carcass starts our conversation. So there you go. I mean, that I don't even remember what inspired this, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this is most recent finished, or not finished, but full haiku, as opposed to jottings.
Yeah, well, that's great for the last one in the book. I love that. Before you go, we'll do one more poem. But if people want to get into National Haiku Writing Month and want to participate, how would they go about doing that? Would they just join the Facebook group and share haiku there, or is there some kind of process to it?
So National Haiku Writing Month has a website, NaHaiWrimo, NaHaiWrimo.com. And that same word is the name of the Facebook group. So you can, if you're on Facebook, log in. There are daily prompts, and prompts actually go year round. Excuse me. Um, we have the community just loves having the prompts year round. So I have guest prompters every month, but I do it in February. And this month our prompts are times of day. So I think the most recent prompt was brunch. I think that's today's prompt, brunch. You can predict some of the earlier and later ones. So you can also just write for yourself. Just write one haiku a day, whether you post on the Facebook page or not, or elsewhere, or use the NaHaiWriMo hashtag on Instagram or whatever, Twitter. It's up to you. Or don't follow the prompts at all. Just write for yourself. Any of that is fine. Just and you can catch up. It's already 6th of February here, so you can catch up for a few days. That's fine too. But if you write at least one haiku a day, get into that haiku habit, it can become addictive, and go for it. And I should also say there are people who share on various Facebook pages for haiku where they're seeking feedback. How can I write this better? What are my problems here? Whatever. And that's fine. But I know some people also write just to share, just to record their lives. They don't want feedback. They don't want a finger wagging at them saying, "You forgot your Kigo." Whatever. Just please yourself. There are many stances for haiku. It can be therapeutic for some people, be like a diary entry for others, literary for others, whatever your motive is, a mindfulness practice for some people. Any of those stances can work. And if you get into the haiku habit, you may find some of those stances evolving for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great. Well, I hope people do participate. It's just a lot of fun. It's a great community. If anybody's thinking about being more active in the haiku community, I definitely recommend it because it's just great people appreciating, the joy of life, really. But we're out of time. I know you have another event to go to. Do you want to do one last poem before you leave?
Okay, so I did have 4 in mind, but I'm going to end with this one. It's called Canticle. Not a haiku. Canticle. I can't take it. I can't cure cancer. Can't lick my elbow. Can't lose weight. I can't run a marathon, let alone an Ironman. Can't act. I can't climb mountains. I can't fly. I can't breakdance or dance anything. I can't afford a trip around the world. I can't stop hiccups. I can't cook. I can't sing. I can't do calculus. I can't win the lottery. I can't speak Japanese. I can't play guitar. I can't pick a lock. I can't be on time. I can't break down a door. I can't give birth. I can't be a morning person. I can't be disciplined. I can't listen enough. I can't explain the origin of the universe. I can't remember my passwords. I can't obey speed limits. I can't kick bad habits. I can't stop aging. I can't whistle. I can't tickle myself. I can't believe 6 impossible things before breakfast. I can't recant. I can't vote Republican. I can't remember names. I can't do 100 push-ups. I can't save the world. I can't save the neighborhood. I can't eat meat. I can't walk a tightrope. I can't hula hoop. I can't wear plaid with stripes. I can't do smoke or do drugs. I can't get a tattoo. I can't shoot a gun. I can't poke a bear with a stick. I can't star on Broadway. I can't be an astronaut. I can't keep resolutions. I can't declutter. I can't read War and Peace. I can't effing swear. I can't act my age. I can't join the circus. I can't wear a kilt. I can't kill. I can't gamble. I can't rap. I can't give up pasta, or cheese, or chocolate. I can't stop reading. And thanks to folks like Tim Green and Rattle, I can't stop writing.
That's great. I was hoping you'd end on that one. A great poem. I love the reading of it too. Canticle. Excellent title. Michael, thanks so much for being a guest. It's been great talking to you. I think a lot of people did learn a lot. Hopefully we'll pick up the haiku bug in some people that was ready to burst out. But thanks for being a guest. It's been as fun as I thought it would be.
Thank you. This has been great fun. We didn't get to a few poems, but I love the fact that we could talk about haiku, and I hope that commentary was useful to people. For more about that, I invite people to visit my graceguts.com site. There's a lot of essays and poems and book reviews and so on. More haiku than you can shake a stick at.
Yeah, when you say there's a lot, that's an understatement of the year. There's so much content; it's hard to even fish through it all. There's so much there to learn, and everything we've talked about is sort of in depth in essay form, plus so many examples of everything. But thanks for all you do, Michael. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Yep, take care. That was Michael Dylan Welch, and again, his website is graceguts.com. That's grace like the word, and then guts like the word. It comes from is it a Ginsberg quote, I think? Or no, E. Cummings.
E. Cummings.
E. Cummings,
Yep.
yeah. So, graceguts.com. Tune in, check that out if you would. And now we're going to go to open lines in just a minute. I forgot to tell everybody that we do have an open lines at the end of the show, so sit tight right where you are. If you would like to share a poem, only if you would like to share a poem, though, I will put on the screen the instructions. And what you do is email the poem right now to openmic, that's openmic@rattle.com, and then we can show the poem on the screen if you email it there, just like we were showing things with Michael, although actually he was screen viewing. I just show it myself, so you don't have to worry about it. Just have the poem with you when you read it. But email your poem to openmic@rattle.com, and then find the Zoom link. I'm about to paste it into the chat windows on Facebook and Twitter. So Facebook and YouTube, I should say. So here we go. We will post in these things. Only come over if you want to share a poem. When it gets to be your turn, read your poem, and then you can come back to the stream so you can watch along. It's a little more pleasurable experience watching on YouTube or Facebook or whatever. But pop on the Zoom if you'd like to share a poem. And I will be just back in just a moment with those open lines. So see you in a minute. And we're back. Thanks for waiting around. Like I said, the open lines are available now. Find those links if you'd like to join us. We have 14 people on the call right now, so it's going to definitely be a one-poem limit. And, one poem, try to be like one page-ish. If it goes on to the second page, that's fine too. But don't get too long because we want to get to everybody before I have to leave at about an hour. But they could be poems about current events. They can be poems about the prompt for this week. Or they can be poems that you published recently and are proud of and want to share. And then we can show off the journal, too, where it was published. So that's always fun. The prompt for this week was inspired by last week's guest, who has some poems that are prose poems answering a question from some of her friends. That was Nicole Davis. And so the prompt for this week was this, if anybody would like to do that. The prompt was... go to Quora.com, answer one of the questions on the homepage incorrectly as a prose poem or haibun. Bonus points if you post it there. I don't expect anybody actually did, but I don't know. If you did, that's kind of fun too. And so I apologize. I didn't realize you had to sign up for Quora. I hadn't been there in years, and I didn't realize that you couldn't see the homepage unless you sign up. So sorry if anybody signed up for something and you didn't want to, because I didn't realize that was the case. They switched. I haven't looked at it in 10 years probably. But anyway, if you did sign up, you got some questions there. And this was my question. How did the Greeks make their temples so symmetrical? And that was an actual question. And there was an actual answer, but this is not the answer. But we'll see how it goes. How did the Greeks make their temples so symmetrical? In those ancient days, the air was different. This was before the smog of SUVs and houses with chimneys. The air wasn't air, but atmosphere, which is the Greek phrase for atomic balls of light. Imagine a sea of cellophane bottle caps. That was the sky, all of it hanging in the hum of its own particulate purity. Most birds back then didn't fly, but would bounce on their bellies from atmosphere to atmosphere. See the entry, penguins. It would have looked like a video game overhead if the Greeks knew to call it that. But games weren't invented until the Olympics, and video much later. Legends say it was Icarus who shot the first bird in the belly with an arrow, but it was probably Archimedes. Either way, the Greeks learned what we know today, that a dead bird on a ball drops a perfectly straight shadow, straight from the sky. The Greeks used pencils to trace these lines for their temples. This also is the origin of the word architect. And then the haiku at the end, bounding into the ball pit, seabirds. So that is my haibun. How did the Greeks make their temples so symmetrical? So if you're ever wondering how, that's apparently how. And we'll go in the order of people have appeared. And Carla Schwartz is first. Oh, Carla Schwartz has her finger up. Hey, Carla. Yeah, how you doing today?
I'm doing well. What a night. Really good interview. Thank you. And I loved your poem there.
Oh, thanks.
Very, very inventive. Mine wasn't so inventive. And maybe, I don't know, maybe I have logged into Quora, or I had some old, credentials for Quora, or
yeah, that's the thing. They keep your credentials forever. So that's why I didn't realize you needed an account, because apparently when I went there, I was already logged in too, even though I hadn't been there in 10 years. So
right.
So they remember you though at Quora. So I don't know if you have any old tax documents you need, ask Quora, I guess.
Oh dear.
Anyway, so okay. What do you got? What do you got for us?
I have a prompt poem, and my question that I got from there was, is OpenSea the best platform for NFTs?
Interesting. Okay.
And so this is it. I never liked to divulge private information, although when I free my poetry, I feel like it's no longer personal, but a gift to my readers. I could not create an NFT without first buying cryptocurrency. I don't understand the landscape. One place for the money, one for the non-fungible collections. Such is the OpenSea. There are many platforms, and each one asks for a piece of me, proof of my identity. I've tried to dive in. I don't know who I am, that I can't buy cryptocurrency. OpenSea, dead to me, failed identity.
That is funny. Thanks so much for sharing that, Carla. And it is. I know you've tried your hand at the NFT poems, and we have that issue coming up. That is the hard thing, is getting through the actual tech stuff in order to actually do it. It's a real barrier to what is an otherwise really interesting concept and useful thing.
Right. So in this, I tried to take the metaphor of what OpenSea might mean and and put that all together.
Yeah. Yeah, very cool. Thanks, Carla. Always a pleasure.
Yeah.
And that was Carla Schwartz. Is OpenSea the best platform for NFTs? Let's go next to, speaking of NFTs, let's go to Katie Dozier, who is a fan of NFTs, I know. Oh, you're on mute, Katie. You got to unmute.
I didn't accept the request to unmute. I decided to stay muted. This is such a great show tonight. I love the discussion about wonder and curiosity. And I've been really into haiku lately, and I think that really pinpointed why to me was the gratitude inherent in it. So now I want to go write 1 million haiku.
Yeah, that's the thing. I never thought of it that way, but as soon as you said it, I was like, oh, so that is, that really is why. Yeah.
Me too. So it's funny because the prompt poem, I love Carla Schwartz's prompt poem because she mentioned NFTs, and I was feeling kind of silly for having NFTs in mind, but I feel like Carla and I basically planned this without talking.
So I have this up. So you actually posted it. You minted it as an NFT, and then you posted it on Quora. So
yeah,
here, I'll put it on the screen. But this is an actual Quora. If you want to know what will eventually replace physical art form, what else can it be used for? You'll find the answer here in Katie's answer. And then over on object, here is the poem. So here we go. Whenever you're ready. Do you want to say anything more about it?
It has like NFT specific jargon, but I'm hoping that the images are interesting enough that if you don't totally understand all the weird words, it's at least entertaining for you. If not, I'm sorry, at least it's a haibun. What can I say?
Okay, well, let's hear it.
Okay. We're still early, friends. Will NFT eventually replace physical art form? What else can it be used for? Incorrectly pluralized, well-intentioned Quora question. You can knit a tea cozy out of NFT or toss a ball to NFT. Better yet, carve a log out of NFT to farm metaverse mushrooms and fungible fungi. In such a way, you can find yourself between blockchain candles, consuming NFT on a red checkered tablecloth spread out over neon grass, battling digital ants for the scattered crumbs of rainbow pixels. Please ignore Grizzly NFT, asking to be poked on the swing set behind us. He's just fishing for your wallet again. Or NFT could be a pet that sheds too much, glitchy barks, walking in tokenized parks. The way things are headed, NFT may even mint me. Autumn portrait, nature's provenance rises every fall.
Oh, that is great. Excellent, Hyben. We're still early friends. And I just love the idea that people are going to actually find that on Quora and then and find their way to it. And you also mentioned the Rattlecast here, so we get the plug as well if they do. So thanks for doing that, Katie, and thanks for sharing it.
Yeah, I think Cora's going to find a way to log me out after reading this response.
Maybe.
We'll see.
It could be.
All right, thanks so much. Have a good night.
Yep, you too.
Bye.
Bye. That was Katie Dozier with We're Still Early Friends. Let's go next to Dick Westheimer.
Hey, Tim.
Hey, Dick, how you doing tonight?
Oh, good. That was great. I have the good fortune of being in a monthly haiku group that Michael shows up for
Oh,
about
really?
half
That's
the time.
great. Yeah. So how is it online? I assume because they're in different areas.
It
Yeah.
is. It is. I can send you information about it. It's the Mercantile Library of Cincinnati, so it's mostly local folks. But you know, we welcome haikuers from all over.
Oh, very interesting. How long have you been doing that?
Since the beginning of the pandemic.
Ah, gotcha. Well, that's
We
very
used
cool.
to do it in person, and I couldn't make it on an ordinary basis. But once the lockdown happened, I had some free time on my hand.
Well, that's for sure. So what would you like to share?
I think I'll do Poets Respond poem that the hidden books soon to be censored make plans.
Okay, and tell us what it's about while I put it up.
Sure. And one thing while you're getting it is I did do the Quora thing. And I found Quora questions. There were a bunch of needy people on there.
Oh, really? The weird thing
Yes.
for me, I must have like answered or clicked on a military question at some point, and so every single thing was until I had to go to like some group. I had to cheat and not do the homepage because everything was like, which tank had the most firepower in World War One? And I was like, I don't know. I mean, I could have, but I just didn't feel like going there.
I don't know what my homepage says about the last time I was on it, because the least needy question I could find is, what have you been complimented on most often? That was the best of them. So this one was about in a couple counties in Florida. The school superintendents interpreted the DeSantis's restrictions on books as to saying any teacher should cover up their bookcase until the authorities, media folks come in and check out every book on their shelf.
Oh,
so,
God.
so they emptied their bookshelves and a bunch of folks threw craft paper over it. And I just couldn't help imagining what went on behind that paper.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's hear it. Go ahead.
Yeah. The hidden books soon to be censored make plans. Under the cover of craft paper, the books consort, talk of their plots and characters and some blotted out words, and tell of kids who wept onto their pages, the others who laughed out loud, the ones who gaped in awe when a poem turned to elf and dust. There was that tear-stained drawing of a polar bear on an ice floe melting to the sea, and another, a mama doe lost to a hunter's gun. The books suspected they'd remain undisturbed in hiding for just a short time and visited quickly in their private space. Words and whole pages jumped down from their spines, crossed over the shelves, looked to find camaraderie among the chapters of others' tales, and conspired to thwart the inspectors they'd heard were bound to take some of them away. Soon, one by one, they found refuge. Two married moms in one book snuck from their bindings to join a group of bears dancing in the woods. A wizard took his wand and went to stay with a little girl trying to find God. Harriet Tubman went underground again, took her deeds to a book of poems. Brother Eagle flew to find a wrinkle in the fabric of time. They each prepared for the day when the craft paper bandage would be torn off and the terrible light from the eyes of the censor selectors would burn into them. The words in their books whispered into the dreams of students who'd previously read their printed lines. They charmed them with knowledge of ancient bards who'd memorized and recited to whomever would listen. The children became like Homer and Sappho and Bilbo and his kind, reciting rhyme and hero tales to each other as they walked to and from school. The parents and teachers gathered round to learn the old ways from the young. The hauled-off books found each other again in dumpsters and storage lockers, said hosannas to the new breed of kids who kept their words alive. In the dark of their captivity, their letters, like runes, shimmered on their pages.
Yeah, great poem, Dick. And that's a very imaginative and one of those things that kind of writes itself once you have the idea. That had a great flow to it. Thanks for sharing that.
You're welcome. I wanted to say that all the books, The Two Married Moms, The Wizard with His Wand, Harriet Tubman, Brother Eagle, these were all books that are on the censored list.
Yeah, it's amazing. The just censorship everywhere. It's a problem we're all dealing with in the age of information and supposedly free access to it. So definitely an important topic. Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Dick. Yeah. And the weird thing too is we have a lot of subscriptions. I shouldn't say this out loud. We have a lot of subscriptions for Rattle at high schools, and there's stuff in there that if certain people knew about, that might be behind that blanket as well. So hopefully, I think it's probably like 50 high schools maybe that subscribe to Rattle. All right, let's go next to Guy Chambers.
Hi, Tim.
Hey, Guy. How you doing tonight?
Yeah, pretty good. I really like those poems. Of course, I like haiku. I like the smaller ones.
Yeah, you do.
Well, I really like how he set up that hydrogen jukebox. How he set up those poems. I thought that's a really different style. I really like that. Something different.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I got this one poem here. I got published here a couple months ago.
Ah, congrats.
And this one,
yeah,
this is off of that one Prairie Journal. Like I said, I had four poems published, and I read 3 of them already through the things here. So this is the last one here. So it's called Boxcar. Settlers in a boxcar, till to the railroad ties, wheels to the steel, echoes those before. In a railroad car, a grandpa smoking a cigar and playing a guitar. A church mouse, out at the elbows, eroded, railroaded. Exile in his smile. It's been like that for a while. Ground down, town to town, 1 nickel, 1 dime at a time. To him, that's just right, fine. Sky eyes, so tough, rough enough, scars, always what they are. See it as it is. Tell it straight up on the guitar strings, for that's his sing. Tongue songs, singing so long, hope others don't have to live this life. A ghost to the eyesight. Songs playing in his head. He'll ride to the railhead, and that's will he be his finally homestead.
Actually, thanks so much for sharing that, Guy. Yeah, great conjuring of a scene there through the rhyme. Boxcar. Yeah.
I saw a picture like back in the dirty 30s, like most of the people who had to ride rail cars trying to get around, trying to find the jobs and all that, and that's what this came up from. That seeing that one picture there.
Yeah, well, that's cool because we were hiking with the kids on Sunday down through the railroad tracks area here. We just love it. It's the best hike, and all the trains come rumbling by. Yeah, thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
Conjuring that back, guy.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Yep,
Bye.
take care. Next up, we got Mike Bales.
Good evening.
Hey, Mike.
I'll make a pitch. My friend Mary Jo Bellistreri, out of the Milwaukee area, she publishes a lot of haiku.
Oh, very cool.
I always think she's someone to follow if people are looking for poets to follow.
Well, yeah, well, tell her to send stuff in, because that's we only publish people that send stuff in. but do tell her.
Yeah, I'll tell her. She's busy taking care of a husband with a lot of problems, but I think every now and then she gets to write.
Mm-hmm.
So I just sent it to you. It's a file that begins with awesome on it. I sent it like an hour ago.
Okay, let me see. It says, please. Oh, yeah, gotcha. Yeah. Right here.
In spite of a crazy morning, I first wrote about Kermit the Frog joining the Yardbirds, but that didn't quite seem to be working. So this morning I wrote something else in spite of the morning being kind of crazy.
Okay, let's hear it.
Yeah, this is called Psychological Facts You Should Know. You feel bigger in a small room as you lose yourself in perception. You want to write suddenly, but write about an old thought. You look at a glass half full, and it is half full, but light through a stained glass window is what you make of it. You tend to pay your bills late, but you can't blame it on your mother. You complain that the lost item you found was in the last place you looked. Yet if you kept looking, you are compulsive. If you play a song on YouTube, there's a 75% chance you'll hear it again. If you read a novel more than once, on page 57, you walk through an open door.
That's great.
There's a little bit of another prompt I responded to too.
That's funny. Yeah, that was referring to Quora.com's what are some of the most awesome psychological facts. And very fun. Good use of the prompt, Mike. That was a pleasure.
Okay, thanks.
Yep, take care. There's Mike Bales with Psychological Facts You Should Know. Nate Jacob is next.
Hey.
Hey,
evening.
Nate. Yeah, how you doing today?
I'm surviving.
Yeah, excellent. I heard you're publishing poems in newspapers. That's really cool.
Yeah, on a whim, I sent one in, and the tiny local paper went ahead and put it out there. So.
Yeah, I just thought that was a great idea because, people like we have one that's like covers the tri community, they call it here. It's got like a circulation of like bigger than most literary magazines, And so why not? I mean, they're desperate for content, and they'll it's a great thing, a great place to put poetry. I thought it was a great idea.
Well, my wife made me call around to some friends and ask for their copies of the paper, and not a single one had read it.
Well, maybe the bird cage,
oh well,
the bottom
par for the course.
Yeah. It's a great idea. I love it. So what do you got to share though today?
I did a Quora poem.
Okay.
And I signed up for Quora, even though it made me nervous.
Sorry, I apologize.
That's fine. So far, it's been fine. The question I chose was, which is correct? I feel attacked or I felt attacked? And I agree with Dick. There's a lot of needy people asking a lot of silly questions on Quora.
There definitely are. So I'm trying to find it. So let's see. You emailed it to me?
I did. You want me to email it again? You want to come back to me?
Yeah, let's come back so we can show it because I don't see it here.
I'll resend it.
Let's circle back and we'll,
Okay,
cool. Let's go to Jerry Stevenson because it is fun to see the poem too. Hey, Jerry, how you?
Hey, Tim, I'm good. I like the local newspaper thing. Our editor here is a friend of mine, and he publishes me about every 3 months.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, I think it's an unutilized opportunity, I think, that we could really take advantage of. Yeah, so what do you have for us tonight, Jerry?
I got 2 short poems.
Okay.
Like if you squeeze them in.
Yeah, they're really short.
Hand in hand.
Yeah,
okay.
Sure.
These were picked up by Spill Awards about a year ago. And I was sorting out my office again and doing some stuff. I'm not a good filer, I guess. And I came across them again. I thought, wow, I read a lot of history. And you know what? It's repeating itself again. It makes me crazy.
Yeah.
So here you go. The first one, An Evening in Kiev. Last night, I viewed an old woman and a soldier. Under the streetlight, she reached out a packet to him. Last night, he placed it in his pocket and smiled. Her lips pursed tight, and she spoke these words. This pouch contains sunflower seeds, our national flower. From my garden, once my mother's garden, once her mother's garden. This pouch I sewed into my grandfather's World War I shirt. I gift it to you, so when you die in our country, far from home, your corpse falls forgotten to the ground. These sunflower seeds will bloom. And maybe my granddaughter, my great-granddaughter, may spy them, my grandsons. And when they, may spy them in time. Will they think of me and my many gifts to foreign soldiers like you and remember the terrible price we all pay? Last night, I saw her approach many soldiers. I got that from a CNN news clip. And right afterwards, I got this clip. And it's just been crawling in my head since then. Anyways, the next one's called A Night in Kiev on the creative night. Okay. Still, it is so cold, pushed into a crevice awaiting. Still, he is so still, yet coiled spring saving to explode. Still, as quiet as a mouse that smells cat, but he is werewolf. The pursed voice of a Baba explains why she gifts seed packets to foreign soldiers. Never leaves his mind. The sounds of sirens shatter, the whistle of rockets and bombs. Coward toys scream. Never leave his mind. He steps the steps of the never forgiven soldier, just meters away, package in his seeds in his pocket, flinched to be spread, or planted in his pockets. These havoc spreaders. Father taught him to work, farm, harvest, plant things, gifts from the earth. Father showed him life, love, and eternal hope for all. Father never thought his son would seed foreigners with sunflowers when he terminated them in alleyways, abandoned homes where we would find them. He still never comprehended that he would be the harvester of men. He still never dreamed they would be fodder for sunflowers. He still never imagined a foreign soldier would execute his father standing in a doorway when he drove by. The farmer, the father, the Baba, all the soldiers know how terrible the price everybody pays.
Yeah, great pair of poems, Jerry. And you know, one of those things, a year later, you think that something might have changed, and it's the same.
Same thing. Yeah. Anyways, I was trying to do something later. I do a lot of homework stuff too, like humor and laugh. And these just got right back into me again. They're still there.
Mm-hmm. Yep, definitely. Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing that, Jerry. It's always a good to hear.
Thank you very much, Jim. Good show tonight, too.
Thank you. Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye. That's Jerry Stephenson with 2 poems about the war in Ukraine. Let's see. Yep, here's Nate Jacob. We got your poem now, Nate. Let's spin back to Nate. Hey, Nate.
Hey, good news. It turns out I never pressed send.
There you go. Well, that would explain it. I looked in the spam and thought maybe you were spam, but no. So what was
spam worthy?
Yeah, I doubt that. So what do you have? What was your core question?
Which is correct? I feel attacked, or I felt attacked.
Interesting.
And,
yeah, I guess I see Dick's point with the needy people maybe on Quora.
There's some silly questions.
That's a subtle distinction between the two. Yeah. Okay.
Some people need to learn to Google. So, all right, let me read it. Which is correct? I feel attacked, or I felt attacked. To feel anything at all in this world of removal is a gift bestowed upon you by God. This upheaval, as you call it, landed square where you were dealt it. Never mind if past or present, if it left you badly welted. Someone better say they're sorry. They were sorry, or they are sorry for the senseless violence from a joke that went too far. No, best to let it go, my friend. There's no bomb here to disarm. There was no attack intended. No one meant you any harm. If you do not feel you're wounded, then you're not and cannot be. Go on with your life from here, son. Read the Stoics, friend. You'll see.
Excellent. Yeah, great. Gary used the rhyme. We don't see a whole lot of that, Nate. I always appreciate it. That was yeah, good answer to the question too.
I did not post it.
Well, maybe you should. But I wonder if you posted it like as prose, would anybody notice the rhyme in the meter there? I wonder.
Maybe I'll post that as a question.
Oh, that's a great. Yeah, we're on a roll, and maybe somebody can answer your question with another poem.
Oh, beautiful.
Wow. Yeah, my mind just blew. But thanks, Nate. Always great talking to you.
A lot. Great
Yeah.
show.
Yep. Take care. Nate Jacob with which is correct. I feel attacked, or I felt attacked. Next up, let's go to Sharon Ferrante, our resident short poems expert, who probably liked the show today.
I am mute. Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. Hey, Sharon, how you doing?
Okay, how are you?
I'm great. It's been a fun show. I'm looking forward to seeing what you have for us.
Oh my God, you know I love Michael.
Mm-hmm.
I thank you so much for that interview. Yeah.
Yeah, it was just a pleasure. I have a haiku poet every 6 months or so is my plan. So it was time, and Michael actually mentioned, hey, it's nano po high whatever month, and so
haiku month.
Exactly.
Yeah, my heart is beating. Yeah, I do. Mm-hmm. You know I love haiku.
Yeah.
I wanted to do a prompt poem, but when I went on Quora, I did want to sign it.
Uh-huh.
And there was some questions on the side, and you have got to be kidding me. There was some weird stuff.
Uh-huh.
So I'm like, you know what? I've been wanting to write this poem. So I did do a haibun.
Okay.
Something I've been wanting to write, but I didn't do it on a question.
Okay.
Thus here. Before your book for Pico Iyer, I was outside petting a baby armadillo. Finally, I picked it up, your book, not the armadillo. You were staying in a cabin with Leonard Cohen. He wanted to teach you about stillness, give you an adventure in going nowhere. A traveling writer, being still, letting everything go. I tried it. I sat in stillness, watched a leaf roll across my sandy road. But it wasn't a leaf at all. Remember the armadillo? In a cabin with nowhere to go, I draw a door.
Oh, that was just wonderful. I love that. Thanks for sharing that, Sharon.
Thanks so much.
Yeah,
loved it.
Yeah, really great use of the haibun. I love the haiku, and then the beginning part is a poem in itself. That's great.
Well, I freak out when I gotta use punctuation. Oh, no. I'm like, I write another haibun. Gotta figure out the punctuation. I don't normally write like that.
Yeah, well, you worked
it out. It's only like the second one I've ever.
Well, I think Michael would say you could do whatever you want. If you wanted to have the prose part have no punctuation, I think as long as it worked, it would work. But you did good. So thanks for sharing that.
Thank you so much.
Yep. Good night. Sharon Ferrante with Before Your Book. Next up is Audrey Friedman.
Hello, everybody. He was fantastic.
Thanks. Glad you liked him.
It was such a great choice of guest. Okay, I did the Quora one.
Uh-huh.
What is the strangest, most unexpected thing the surgeon was asked that you discovered inside a patient?
Ooh, that's a dark one.
Mine all come through medical. I don't know why. I saw through the anesthesia haze, a neat slice into my abdomen. Everything in the surgical suite abruptly went still. It's a woman in her womb, an older lady, salt and pepper hair, lacquered red nails, and a scowl. Instantly, I knew the horror of the moment. I carried my mother, long deceased. Would I ever be without her, without the taunting, the haunting? She could never get enough of me, her only child. So she took up residence inside me, probably to make sure she'd never be forgotten, never be alone. But she never foresaw the hysterectomy. Locusts gorge on grain. Untampered greed spawns famine. Hungry harbingers.
Oh, that was great too. Yeah, I did not see that turn coming. Very, very cool poem. Thanks so much for sharing that, Audrey.
Thank you. Thanks for the inspiration.
Yeah, my pleasure. I'm glad we could. These are fun poems everybody's sharing. I appreciate it. Next up, I think Emily Kane. Emily, are you a first-time caller or have you been on before?
Hi. I have not been on before. I'm not even sure how I got here.
Well, it's great. I'm so glad you find it. Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, I enjoyed Michael's talk. I was there for that. And I'm really more of a painter than a writer, but he's gotten me writing haiku. So I go to the Commencement Bay Haiku group and also Haiku Northwest. So I just sent one quick one.
Very cool. Let me one second. Let me pull it up so everyone can see. Sorry.
Oh. Yeah, I'm not seeing the screen. I don't know why.
Yeah.
I just see the people.
Yeah. So I have to pull it up so people at home can watch. But there you go. So I have it now. So we're all set. So go ahead.
I don't see the screen. Anyway.
Yeah.
Thank you. Floating transcontinental, runaway spy balloon, takeout menu.
Oh, that's very cool. Floating transcontinental.
And it would be a haiku,
Yeah.
except I put an exclamation point at the bottom, and that's 4 lines. So it's a short poem. But it's had so many permutations and ended up with this version, which I'll take Saturday to the Haiku Northwest and let them rip it up and redo it. And it's really fun. It's a nice group.
That sounds right.
They're meeting Saturday from 1 to 4.
Very cool. How long have you been participating in that?
A little over 2 years, I'd say.
Yeah.
Yeah,
well,
I found it
cool.
through the Puget Sound Sumi Sumi painters.
Uh-huh.
We have a little group that does haiga, which is haiku with an illustration, whether it's a painting or a photograph. Haiga, Haiga. Yeah. It's fun to be here.
Yeah, well, I hope you come back again.
Haiku
Haiku is welcome anytime. Haiga too, so feel free to join us anytime you like.
You guys meet Mondays?
It is Mondays, and on the West Coast it would be 5 to about 7:30.
Every Monday?
Every Monday, yep. New guest every Monday.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, see you again.
Okay, cool. Yeah, thanks for joining us. That was Emily Kane with a haiku, Floating Transcontinental. And we had a message here from Lucy Chow, who asked if she could go on next because she's got to run soon. So let's get to Lucy.
Hi, Tim.
Hi, Lucy. How you doing tonight? Or today, I should say.
Yeah, it's 10:11 here in China.
Yeah. So what do you want to share?
I did a Quora poem, and also I had to sign up for it.
I'm sorry about that.
This world is filled with these people with all these weird questions. So I found this one. I dreamt that my legs were covered with plants growing out of my skin. What does this dream mean? Did you get that?
I do. Let me put it in a doc just so I don't show your email address. But yeah, go ahead whenever you're ready.
Okay. Sabrina as a hot spring in Mashuioza, Rwanda. I dreamt that my legs were covered with plants growing out of my skin. What does this dream mean? Quora.com. I fell feet first into a mesh of little rails running over fine iridescent silk. My flesh tingled with glints of tactile titters. Sweet, silent, I sat and lay down in the lukewarm water, feeling buried shallowly in the sand, earth's hot, shivering heart. Ah, the immersion, emollient, medicinal, my onaric muse. The next thing, I lay firmly yet fluently embedded in the sabuate skin, my limbs transubstantiated into limpid lymph. I am Sabrina, rising from limbo, I am a reticulum of tiny rivers, my flesh and blood indistinguishable, my consanguinity with this warm pocket of earth perfect. I am a blooming nymph, my arms and legs nursing grounds of nymphae. I nourish these small lilies with my smooth, luscious body burning with love. Glossy green spangles, gathered at the root, grow in rosettes. Veined villous sepals, glabrous pale petals, golden genitals. Born early morning, die just a little afternoon. Second coming, your other halves, second coming. Temporal divide of your hermaphrodite, floral functioning. Protogenous, large seed, few tubers, tropic day bloomer. My gaiety is your gladness, my health your bounty, my pygmy renascent beauties. Mother goddess, great earth, the succubus solid thing, whose spirit I am, slowly overstirring, I am her nymph. You last five sisters, my nymphs, my nymphia, I am your nymphian. Your lifeblood, rare radiant maidens, you are rooted in me. But I lived only in that dream. When I awoke, it was into death, your death, because mine. When my dream fled, it was flushed into foul fabrics, frothing in farmers' fields of famine, my body a distempered, drowsy nothing. All that remained of my soul was the blaring memory of a man whose hand hewed two small hollows in my shriveling flesh, held two uprooted nymphs, then hospiced them in foreign lands. Briefly, the two of you bloomed and bore seed, before one became food in a rat's belly, the other gold in a thief's wallet. All that remained of the memory was that after thousands of thwarted trials, 8 seeds sprouted in a greenhouse where another man hailing to the legendary name of Plant Messiah tried to reunite my soul and body, water and earth, in perfect proportion and constitution, one at the exact same level with the other, not 1 inch of drought or drowning. My thermal homeostasis, 25 degrees Celsius. All that your roots remembered was to suckle the skin of what they knew as mother. They flourished again, found the lost dream. It was my spectre, summoned by Messiah Magdalena. Was it to be your salvation? Extinct in the wild, horticultural gospel on windowsill.
Oh, beautiful as always, Lucy. Thanks so much for sharing that. That was Sabrina as a hot spring in Meshuza, Rwanda. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Great poem. As always is. Very beautiful language. What's that? Oh, I think we lost her. Had her just long enough for the poem, but that's great. So the connection is a little rough sometimes, keeping up between all the way around the world. Let's go to the two first-time callers next to make sure we get them in. So Christine Bissonnette is here. Hi, Christine.
Hi.
Yeah, thanks so much for joining us. So first of all, where are you calling from?
I'm calling from Vancouver, BC in Canada.
Excellent. Well, thanks so much for joining us. What do you have that you'd like to share?
I have a poem. It's not in response to the prompt, but it's a poem I wrote recently for my mother.
Oh, very cool. Yeah. Is there anything else you want to say about it, or do you want to jump right in?
I think I'll just jump right in.
Okay, go ahead. It's up for everybody at home. You got to read your own copy.
If belief were made of wind. Slowly, she began to build a nest out of the usual things. Inside tumbled a trio of children and a dull spindle with no thread. The landing was much softer than she feared, but still she lifted each arm, looking for bruises. Later, we blocked out the chill, made a home, peeled paper off the walls, and hung each strand from our biceps like wings. She, our mother, dreamed, which is sometimes all there is to do. We were not waiting for the spell to be broken. Mother had stopped plucking her feathers, believing she would never fly. She practiced unfurling her petals and bones, learned to demand from the world what was needed. When the wind had softened into a breeze she could hold in her belly, seeds from the field maple spiraled and twirled, we found ourselves held. Together we spun what was empty into roots and burrowed as the walls cracked and our mother began to bloom.
Oh, very cool, especially contrasting Lucy's poem just now, too. If belief were made of wind. Great reading of it, too. Thanks so much for sharing that, Christine.
Thank you.
Yeah, I hope you can join again every Monday, like we told Emily. Yeah, for sure. Yeah,
No,
thanks
I'll
for being
definitely do
here.
that. Thank you.
Cool, thank you. Yeah, it was Emily Bissonette with If Belief Were Made of Wind. And let's go to Sangeeta Calarickle, who another first-time caller.
Hi, Tim.
Hey, thanks so much for joining us. How you doing? Where are you calling from?
I'm calling from Minnesota.
Excellent.
Just recovering from a cough. So
I think like 90% of the country it's been a rough winter, I think, for sure.
Yeah, it sure has. They lovely, very nice. It's always great to hear Mr. Haiku. Super, yeah.
Definitely is. Yeah, well, I'm so glad you could be here. So what do you have that you'd like to share?
So I had sent you 2 poems, but I'll read just one because I think we're lacking time. And maybe I should read my first haibun, which I have first work, in the haikaist tradition, which got published. This was a year ago. Foreboding winter. It's a haibun.
Okay.
Foreboding winter. Gusts are picking up pace. Leaves ride the waves. A maple red, a birch gold. Harbingers of what is to come. The pink hydrangea I planted in your memory sways in the breeze. In full flower this year, they are now all shades of daft brown. Your voice rings softly in my mind. They'll prepare to rest soon. The cycle to continue next year. You never even saw the bush. I stand still at the edge of the garden. That particular shade of pink has since transformed into a deep shade of sorrow. The wind blows colder. Yet another year goes by. Hospice bed. She writes her own obituary.
Oh, very touching. Yeah, great haiku at the end of that haibun. Thanks so much for sharing that.
Thank you.
Yeah, so glad you could be here. Hope you can come again too.
Yeah, I will. Thank you.
Okay, great. Yep, take care. Yeah, that was a Foreboding Winter by Sangeeta Calarickle. So thanks so much. That was great. Great poems all around from this open lines tonight. Let's see. Who do we have left? We have Chris Kaiser is up next.
Okay.
Hey, Chris. Yeah. Thanks for waiting around. It's a long night tonight, but we're glad you're here.
Yeah. Really enjoyed the lesson on haiku. It reminds me of something that is attributed to Mark Twain, rightly or wrongly. He is supposed to have said, "I would have written you a shorter letter, but I didn't have the time."
That's a great quote.
And so, yeah, I'm a little wary about writing haiku now. Anyway, I didn't do the prompt. This is a poem I wrote a couple of months ago. I was in the middle of reading Ulysses by James Joyce. I had read a book about how difficult it was to get the book published as well because of censorship. So this has nothing to do with Ulysses. It's just the style of James Joyce inspired the style of the poem.
Interesting. Okay.
It's called Amazing Sausages. Mouth agape, not the brotherly love type, eyebrows raised, emotions tased. She thrust her head downward, froward, willfully disobedient to planned merriment, just in time, and not before or after, to see a display of colorful fresh veggies spill from her bag and semicircle like a Japanese fan around her pristine pink walking shoes. Surging back up, her back up against the wall, she whipped her head behind her left shoulder, a shank to the flank, point blank with bullet dynamism, leaving swaths of wayward hair hazing her sight line, as if playing Legend of Zelda through night vision goggles. Angry puffs of air aimed at her willowy forest of hair from a neon-lit mouth intent on moving from distress to eustress hardly improved her visual grasp of the landscape, of the manscape, the escaped man, the man in red. Was it red? Yes, yes. Even as the question formed in her mind, the crowd red shifted, allowing the perpetrator, the instigator, the nerve grater, no greater than time-stealing stars, who had dislodged her primavera mise en place, to fade away like a pale red dot, perhaps no better demonstration of the folly of human conceits. Thoughts of her known as melanzane al fugetto accompanied a surprising aromatic wave of organum vulgara, suddenly flooding her olfactory senses. A sense memory, perhaps? It didn't make sense. But then it did when she snogged a broken bottle of Mediterranean oregano, splooging its contents between 2 bell peppers and an eggplant. She snapped out of her aromatic reverie to notice a hand softly squeezing her left bicep. A stranger, registering no danger, just a slight tussle with her muscle, now squatting, gathering her veggies. In his bag, the one he placed by her feet, was a purchase obviously from the German butcher. Kirche und Kirche, Pretzel und Tetzel. As he stood up, she bent down, slid her hand into his purchase, and pulled out his bratwurst, link after link, white as the Bavarian sky during Oktoberfest, a zodiac of cylindrical skin-type salted shrid, 12 amazing sausages linking the old world with the new, his world with hers, Saturnalia with Cratch. Smile met smile as he gently pried the prized links from her pink moist palms. Food, check. Friendship, check. Transcendence, check. Yes, thank you. I'm just around. He, the amazing sausage man, softly smiled her into silence. Her sparkling eyes reflected her electric loins. She heard him say, without speaking, words can both reveal the truth and hide it, express our intentions and cleverly disguise them. He heard her say, without moving her lips, I'm going to make you the best damn lasagna you ever had. The convection of time baked their love, al dente to outside influences, a consommé of good stock, flambéed nightly, quadrilled by their own sinews, jacquarded, infused, trussed, and seared, yearly seasoned by seasoned reason, and finally, while garnished in namesuck, slow cooked in a hot nook by love's embers.
Very fun poem, Chris. And funny because I made lasagna last night, but it did not happen like that. I have to say. But I'm looking forward to that. I'm looking forward to eating the leftovers as soon as the Rattlecast is over, though. Because if anyone wants to come over, I have like a very large amount of lasagna left, but it's not that kind. But thanks for sharing that, Chris.
All right, thank you.
All right, and then do we have? Brian O'Sullivan is here. Let's finish out the Zoom with Brian.
Okay.
Hey,
thanks, Tim.
Brian. Yeah, good to see you.
Hey, good to see you. So I'm feeling like I should have more gratitude and wonder because I tried to haibun as prompt poems and they both came out like less like a finger pointing at the moon and more like a political middle finger.
Well, I guess it's one kind of
might
thing.
be doing something wrong, but this is what it is.
Okay.
It's the Conqueror's Heir fantasy. In an update to a current question, a Quora user will ask this. If William the Conqueror had direct descendants to the throne in 2031, where would they be in line? In line for warmed-over hamburger helper at Tallahassee Federal Pen, a hulk of a man with a broken crust of orange hair curses his enemies. Embarrassed, killers avert their eyes rather than bowing to the orange man, though he might be a descendant of William and of everyone who had children in Europe in the 11th century, collapsed pedigrees being what they are. Maybe he's related to William of Orange, too. We know for sure he is a descendant of the conqueror, that thrusting spirit which moves a man to seize a king's death or a country's confusion as his shot. One harrowed the north, the other would have sundered the south from the north. William's triumphs became Harold's tragedy. Donald's campaigns become his own farce. Iron rusts. Dawn runs to dusk. Trump card turns to deuce.
That's a funny haiku. I think I would call that a senru.
Yes, I think that's fair.
Yes, that would be a senbun maybe. Thanks for sharing that. Always a pleasure, Brian. And great to see you. And thanks for waiting for the open lines. It was Brian O'Sullivan with The Conqueror's Hair, a fantasy. So these are fun Quora prompts. Hey, thanks everybody for sharing those. It is past time, so if anybody just emailed poems in and couldn't join the Zoom, I'm not going to be able to read your contributions tonight, unfortunately. We just have there's just too much open lines to get through, and I gotta eat my lasagna at some point. So but thanks everybody who sent poems. I'm glad they were helpful. That the prompt was working. Now really quickly, the Sciku for this week. So this comes from a article from, where is this article from? The University of Innsbruck. And what they've done, and let me put this on the screen for those still watching on YouTube anyway. This right here. One second, there. So it's always too big. But entangled atoms across the Innsbruck quantum network. And so what they did is they had atoms entangled for the use of quantum, or ions, I should say, entangled for a quantum computer network, and it stretched 230 meters across two different labs in this place. And I don't understand how quantum computers work, how you can network that. It really does not make a lot of sense to me based on the way that quantum entanglement works. I don't know how, but anyway. But they managed to do this and entangle two ions that far apart. And so kudos to them, and we'll see if they can actually build a future quantum network using this technology. I mean, they use photons to disentangle the atoms, but then how do they get the superposition back again? I don't understand. I'll have to learn someday. But anyway, this was a Sciku that inspired right here. And talk about the season word. The season word is, of course, not winter like most of us are in right now, but all you listeners in Australia might appreciate this. So here is the Sciku for today. Right about here. Summer night, all of the sheets in town entangled. Summer night, all of the sheets in town entangled. That is your Sciku for the day, and that is the show for today. Next week's prompt for Rattlecast number 181 is going to be right here. You can kind of imagine what the prompt might be. Write a linked haiku sequence in which each haiku includes a line from the previous haiku. So I was hoping to figure out what you would call that, because it's not a renku, because a renku has like a haiku and then two lines, and then they go back and forth like that. It's not a renge. I'm not sure, but whatever it is, let's do a linked haiku, kind of like I think the Hydrogen Jukebox would count of Michael's, because that has the same phrase. You don't have to be the same phrase over and over again, but have some kind of link between haiku and see how long you can keep it going. That is the prompt for next week. We'll work on some haiku. I thought that'd be a good way to get us to write a few at least. And that is going to be the prompt. So hope you enjoy that. Now, next week's guest on the Rattlecast is going to be, who's it going to be? Oh, it's Kwame Dawes. So, of course, Kwame Dawes is known as maybe one of the busiest men in poetry. He's ran the American Life and Poetry column. He's the editor of Prairie Schooner. He's a distinguished professor at the University of Nebraska. He writes books like crazy. He's got the African Poetry Book Fund he runs. His most recent book is Unhistory, which are poems written back and forth, a cycle with him and John Kinsella. So John's not going to be here, but Kwame's going to be here reading some of those poems, some poems from Rattle. We'll talk poetry and all the things he does. He does so much. That's going to be Rattlecast number 181, the regular time, Monday, February 13th at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. Hope to see you then. Hope you have a great weekend in the meantime, and I will talk to you later. Good night.